Good evening, one and all. Welcome to Octocon presents Peadar Ó Guilín and the Sword Garden. We are going to have a quick reading from the Sword Garden by Peadar, after which we'll have a bit of conversation. All right, this is starting very well. Conversation, and the last 15 minutes are meant for the questions. If you're a member of Octocon, you'll be able to join the Zoom at this point. I'm going to hand this right over to Peadar then, who's going to read us a short extract.
Hello, everybody. This is me, Peadar. I'm going to read a little bit from somewhere in the middle of the book. It's a scene where our main character, Jared, is sneaking through an enemy city in the company of possibly his only friend in the world, who's Shirel. And this would normally not be a problem, but Shirel is the last person you want to be sneaking anywhere with. She has very, and I mean very, poor impulse control. So here we go. Several times they hid as people stepped out of their houses. Once, when a man wobbled down the road, singing at the top of his voice, Shirel unsheathed her dagger, and only Jared's panicked response and Medcal's mercy allowed the Torridine to pass unharmed. "They're rebels, you idiot," Shirel told him. And she was right. The death of every Torridine was not only inevitable, it was a sacred duty. After what seemed like hours, they came right up against one of the city walls by the northern gate. This time, the gate was properly closed. In the towers, lights burned to show where guards watched out over the jungle beyond. What if one of them turns around? What if he looks down here? And then, somebody up there cried out an alarm. And the fugitives froze. "They're on to us, boy. We need to..." Bang! Jared jumped. The entire gate, a mass of metal-banded hardwood, shuddered. Bang! Bang! More shouting. Orders being issued in the slippery tongue of the north. There came a growl so large and deep that Jared felt it in his legs, followed by another rumble that for all the world sounded like the voice of a giant. Guards spilled out onto the roof of the tower to wrestle with a huge ballista. Each of its arrows was 3 strides long and barbed with a jagged head. "A few shots of that will drive it off," said Shirel. She had better be right. Jared had seen illustrations of monsters back at the monastery and had quite enjoyed looking at the awesome variety of them. Some said the ancients themselves had created such horrors for their wars, but Jared had never believed it. For who would leave something so deadly behind to haunt their descendants for all eternity? The first missile flew out of sight. The growl turned to an ear-splitting shriek, and the guards were already winding the winch back for another go. "We should run while they're distracted," said Jared. But Shirel was walking towards the gate, as though hypnotized. "The creature smells blood," she said, "from the fighting." She was right. Monsters took cattle whenever they could, but everybody knew it was human flesh they craved. They'd long since been driven away from the rich plains around the capital, but in isolated areas, a poorly defended village could be depopulated in a single night. Bang, bang, bang. The ballistic crew released another missile. Come on, Jared begged Shirel. We have to get Tamara. This could be our only chance. Shirel swung around, grabbing him by the shoulders. No, boy, she said, her face suffused with excitement, with joy. I have a better plan. Help me open the gate. Are you mad? She shrugged him off and ran forward again as the crew prepared for another shot. Behind the gate, the creature, whatever form this particular one took, was weeping piteously. Jared watched Shirel struggle for a moment with the bar. How, he wondered, how could she let a monster loose in a city, even a rebel city? It was deeply, deeply wrong. But when the first guard saw her and cried out in alarm, Jared knew they would be upon her in seconds, and he could not let that happen. Good lad, Shirel cried as Jared added his strength to hers. All the guards were shouting and running back to the tower, where there would be stairs or a ladder to take them down to ground level. Meanwhile, as Jared heaved at the bar, the whole gate was vibrating. Yum! Crooned the monster just on the other side of the wood. And Jared, remembering his lessons, whimpered in fear, for in the language of the ancients, that word was an expression of hunger. The first guard sprinted from the door of the nearest tower, but she was too late. The bar dropped away, clunking to the paving stones. Then the huge gate burst open, flinging the fugitives back, and the nightmare began. No illustration could have prepared Jared for the real thing. The monster was elephant-sized, but shaped more like a spider with multiple spike-tipped limbs. They struck sparks from the paving stones, propelling its great bulk forward with the speed of a charging horse. As it passed, a great stench of old urine filled the air, and Jared saw with horror that the thing was no mere animal, for it had decorated its scaly, warty skin with necklaces of tiny human skulls. It had a head of sorts, a round thing attached to the end of a trunk that waved in circles high above its body. There might even be a face, but Jared couldn't see it from the back. Come and play, cooed the head in the ancient tongue. It had a voice of its own, high and sweet, full of giggles. Come, children, come to me. The unfortunate guards may have been nothing but bakers or merchants, yet they moved to block its path with locked shields. And then, metal screeching, they were battered aside in an instant by its charge. Two of them tried to get up after, but the monster spun around and punctured each of them with the tip of a different limb before running off towards the center of the city. It hadn't even bothered to eat anyone. What kind of a creature did that? What have we done? Said Jared. I know, boy. Amazing, right? Let's get a move on while they're all busy with this thing. Jared could still hear the creature up ahead of them. Come play with me, little ones. Come play. An alarm drum sounded as the fugitives slipped behind the houses again, ducking under a line of damp laundry strung between the buildings. Everywhere lamps were lighting, drums were banging, people shouting. Monsters are very common here in the north, said Shirel. Have you seen one before? Not up close, and not for want of trying. The tribes won't let the likes of us into the jungle for some reason, as if we try to take it from them. They're welcome to their snake-infested, poisonous shithole. They caught another glimpse of the monster between buildings. Men and women swarmed around it, while arrows whipped in from all sides. Liquid squirted from its warty hide, and at first, Jared thought it might have been injured, except that it was laughing now. And where the liquid came into contact with human skin, fighters staggered back, screaming in pain. Again, he wondered how anybody thought a human could create such a thing, especially the ancients who had sacrificed everything to find a new home among the stars for their descendants. But how could such a creature arise naturally? And why did it speak the language of the gods? Then, for just a moment, the appendage that carried the monster's head spun to look into the alley. Jared had been warned by some of the books he'd read not to look. But back then, in the silent comfort of the monastery, he had thought it an exaggeration. It wasn't. The head at the end of the trunk bore a completely human face. Male or female, he couldn't say, but it was beautiful, with large, lustrous eyes, shining with so much love that he and Shirel were pinned to the spot. Come and play, it purred. We will have such larks together. But then it screamed, flinching away to face forward again. Something struck it, and its whole body shuddered. You're upsetting me, it whined. Why can't we just play? And that is the end of that reading. You're on mute, Sean. I know you're talking.
I know.
I know you are.
I know. All right. And quite a yummy reading right there. You never fail to delight and horrify in equal measure. It can be quite confusing. I'll actually have a question related to that specific extract. But ready for some hard-hitting questions?
I'm ready for the soft pedal ones. Peadar, why are you so lovely? That would be a good one to start with.
No, I was thinking more along the lines of, how are you?
Oh, yeah, pretty good, thanks. Pretty good, yeah.
I think a lot of us have had a very difficult year. And I'll be honest, I have not done that well myself. One of the things I've had trouble with is reading. Having the focus to read, and I've been doing a lot of rereading works that are already familiar and just comfortable. So this could not have come at a better time. I was delighted to be asked to interview you, and I read it quite quickly, and it's helped me get back into reading in general. So that was absolutely delightful. Thank you very much. I mean, it doesn't mean we wouldn't have preferred to have a book of yours sooner, but we're very, very happy it's here now. So thank you for that. Let's talk about protagonists. Your protagonists tend to be teenagers very often, which makes sense, with the audience being YA and adults. They tend to have a sense of injustice. So all of this we know, all of this helps get into action, have stakes from the very start. they also tend to have a disability, more or less severe. Jared's disability is not that severe to us, yet still it ostracizes him. You've in fact won an award for your depiction, specifically your depiction of polio in the call. So disability in your protagonist is something we've come to expect, really. Why is that such an important thing, to have protagonists with a specific disability and have it affect the way their cultures tend to see them?
Does Jared have a disability? What disability does he have?
Well, it's never made entirely clear, but I don't know by name, but he has a tick. He has a facial tick, right? It seems nothing to us, but it does play a role in how society views him.
It does play a bit of a role. Yeah, it's particularly in how his father sees him, which I guess is the main relationship at the start of the book. That is true. I mean, I don't deliberately pick disabilities. I think I'm always interested in the people that in these books tend to be discounted. You know, the people nobody expects to live. It was why in the first chapter of the call, Nessa ends that chapter with the words, "I'm going to live and nobody's going to stop me." And this is kind of what I want for all my characters. The same with the Stopmouth and the Inferior. Basically, he's the person nobody expects to survive. And so, I mean, I think in a lot of fiction it's like this, but my challenge is always to find the person nobody expects to survive, and then show that they can anyway, and show that they will anyway, and show that, again, to quote Nessa, nobody is going to stop them, because they will make their own, they will take their own space, basically. You know, they usually start off ceding all the space, making themselves even smaller. But by the end of the book, they're taking their space in the world, you know, and they're no longer ashamed of who they are, and yeah, they're taking charge basically by the end.
And it does put them in a very clear physical disadvantage in the worlds they have to contend with. That's less the case for Jared, and yet, even then, it makes him seem unworthy to society, unworthy to his father, which is something that comes back as well. The worth of a person and how it is determined.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
no, that's that is it's a major theme in the book, right? Without having too many spoilers in it. It is all the societies in the book are obsessed with worth, and who is worth saving, and who is worth keeping, and who should be sacrificed because they're not worth anything. And that was precisely the theme of my first novel, The Inferior, as well. Even the title, The Inferior, you know, was about that. Who is inferior to whom? You had the main character, who was considered inferior by his own tribe, shall we say, and that entire tribe considered inferior by other humans. Yes, that's it. It's out of focus, but I know what it is. Yeah. So yeah, no, it is a major theme of the Sword Garden. Who is worth saving and who is not, basically. But in most cases, it's up to the people to you know, they basically have to fight to show they're worth saving. I mean, they were always. It's not. I'm not saying that people should have to do that. They shouldn't. But that's what Jared finds he has to do in this story.
Absolutely. Though by the time they've shown they're worth saving, they no longer need saving. They've done that themselves.
Well, then they can save other people, you know?
Yes.
Which is
Yes,
usually what happens as well.
absolutely. So, talking about the worthiness of people, memory is quite an important theme in all the books, really. Um, in the Cool, because it's weaponized in a very clear way. Here, it's even more deeply rooted in the cultures, in the societies. You've done that several times in your short stories as well, the collection Forever in the Memory of God.
Yeah.
That's something very interesting. So, memory is a very, very central aspect in cultures. And that's immediately tied to the worth of people in their societies as well. Why is that?
I actually can't answer that question. It is true that it comes up again and again in my work, that people are always obsessed with, you know, the past and the life they've led up to this point, and people they knew, especially people who are dead, that they're always having conversations with them. It's something I do as well. There's a cousin of mine I talk to in my mind quite often, you know. It's a thing that happens. I don't know why that is. They're always trying to solidify this memory as well, you know, in various ways. Not just in this book, in some of my unpublished books as well. It's there as well in a very big way. Here it is, you have in the society that Jared is part of, you have a religion which, the state religion, believes that long ago, um, their ancestors left Earth, which was dying, to find a world that they could all live in, and that one day these people would return and take them away. But they're not going to take everyone. Oh no, they're not going to take everyone. They're only going to take the families whose names are kept in the emperor's vault. And so when you do something that the emperor approves of, when you do something great, what they call a deed, like if you're the first over a wall in a siege, for example, you know, if you save a noble, you know, all these different things counts as deeds. It gets added to your family scroll, and your family scroll, if it has enough deeds, gets added to the vault. And then when the gods return, they'll check the vault. Yep, you belong here, and they'll bring everybody in that family, living and dead. They'll bring them all off to this paradise that they've discovered among the stars. That's basically the state religion right there. Clearly, it serves the emperor very well, you know, as an instrument, but it's something that people deeply believe. They even had a rebellion mentioned in the book to try and get control of the vault, control over who gets added to these scrolls and what deeds get added to these scrolls. It's clearly really important to them and incredibly distressing, you know, to be forgotten. And as a result, the greatest punishment that this society has is to remove you from memory. It's something the ancient Egyptians did. They would go around the place removing people's names from carvings, basically. So this is what happens in this society as well, and it's to the point. It's even more extreme, to the point where a religious person like Jared is forbidden even from thinking about the people who've been removed. And some people incredibly close to him have been removed. And this is absolutely heartbreaking for him. That's his real disability, if you like. His real sorrow is that he's not allowed to think about these people.
damnatio memoriae, which is a very real historical tool. You mentioned
Yes.
the Egyptians. They're not the only ones all throughout history. The most well-known contemporary or more contemporary example being the Soviet Union, but
Mm.
everyone does that to some degree. We actually just had a bit of a scandal here in Luxembourg where the American ambassador published a picture of her with a few Luxembourgish dignitaries, and she had removed the previous ambassador who was in the picture. And so
Wow.
everyone had to work out of it. So damnatio memoriae, very, very real thing.
Mm.
And it works on several levels as a political tool, on a cultural, on a religious level. It works on a personal level as well, where losing your memories becomes a very, very scary thing. Even with
Yes.
all the other traumas, Jared is scared. He's not just not allowed to think of the people he lost, but there is a moment when, for other reasons, his own memories start disappearing, which is something you've explored as well in the short story I mentioned before, Forever in the Memory of God. At which point I think memory really becomes identical to identity.
Yeah.
So the idea that someone else controls your very identity, how do you even deal with that kind of trauma?
Yeah. Obviously, it would be approaching very, very close to spoiler church to talk about how Jared deals or fails to deal with this. But it is true. I mean, we all change as we get older. We all become more curmudgeonly, or maybe the hard edges get worn off or whatever. But no matter who we are, um, to a large extent, we are an accumulation of memories. You know, um, that's how we see ourselves. That's how we create ourselves. And yes, it's true. We edit these memories ourselves without realizing that we're doing so. Um, but even so, they are basically our treasure. They're everything that's important to us.
All right, let's get a bit away from possible spoiler territory and let's talk about what you've actually read just at the beginning of this, which features, once again, a chimera.
Mm.
Now, we've got a lot of ideas of what the apocalypse is going to look like. And obviously, nuclear warfare is a big option, chemical warfare. That's not the better way. In your books, we tend to get biological mutations, the creation of chimeras, um, and they start with human bodies. Human bodies, a human face that get transformed into a diabolical mix of creatures with the aim to not just kill, but I think more to the point, scare, horrify. What is up with that? Why do you want to do that to us?
I'm not sure I want to do it, but I kind of always imagine. So you're right. They're nuclear weapons, and you know you can't really beat nuclear weapons for if you absolutely positively have to destroy a civilization, you're not going to get better than nuclear weapons. I guess you could maybe drop a giant rock from orbit or something. But really, a nuclear weapon is just a way to do that from here. Um, but I kind of always imagine it. I have an awful lot of stories, including one I'm writing at the moment, a novel I'm kind of writing at the moment. But I have a huge, including the Inferior. Um, Almost all my stories take place in a very, very similar universe. right? Which is basically that the world we are living in now, we are not capable of not destroying it. Eventually, we destroy it. I mean, goes right back to the inferior, right? Eventually, we destroy it, and right at the end, you get a group of incredibly rich people who use the last of the Earth's precious resources to save themselves. That's always the way in my stories, right? I'm not saying that's what will happen. I hope to God not, but I'm just saying that's the background, because for me, it's it's the trajectory we are on, right? I hope we get off it, but it's the trajectory we're on. And this kind of background in my books is always meant to be a warning, not about the possible things that might happen, but the trajectory we are actually on. So, but again, I don't want to make that the main focus of the book, because that's just way too depressing, even for me, right? That's just going somewhere. That's just a dead end. I'm much more interested in what happens after, when the pieces start getting picked up. So in the inferior, what happened is that they fly away on their spaceships with the last of the technology. They think they've abandoned Earth. They think Earth is doomed and done for. But unaccountably, Earth survives, and the people there survive, and they bootstrap themselves, and they develop the technology even further, because technology, I think, doesn't tend to really get forgotten. It can, if it's as long as it can be written down, it can be preserved, and people can build on it later on. And they created spaceships that were so much more advanced than the ones that left, that they overtake the ones that left while they're still in flight, with the rich people still asleep on board. So that was kind of the background to the inferior. And where were we go? Oh yes, we were talking about the beasts. Where did the beasts come into it? So
Exactly. That was a very interesting answer to a question I didn't ask. Didn't
no, precisely. But we're circling back there. We're circling back to it. Yeah, yeah. So I always picture that as these societies start going down and start fighting over resources, they're not very likely to nuke each other. It might happen, but I think they're not so likely to nuke each other. More than likely, the attacks will be much more subtle, and there'll be much more psychological attacks, things like cyber warfare, for example, that kind of stuff. And I always imagine these chimeras, especially the ones in the Sword Garden, like the one that we just met. I imagine that these things being created and set loose where your enemies live, or you would deny all knowledge of having made them. And basically, it's just a form of psychological war. They're just meant to horrify, particularly the whole idea that these creatures just feed on children by preference. You know what I mean? Like that they're there to lure children away, like something out of Grimm's fairy tales, by preference, because it's meant to horrify, it's meant to demoralize, more than anything else. So that's where they came from in the Sword Garden, anyway.
Mm. Which also brings me to another element that we see again and again in your work, which is the horror as the day-to-day. Your protagonists tend to live in worlds that are absolutely horrifying to us. And this is the reality. And from there, they have to find a parallel reality, an alternative to it. And you're often going to have alternatives in your books, where suddenly there are different worlds side by side, which do not seem from the onset as if they belong together.
Mm.
So it's never entirely clear which reality is the worst.
Yeah. I mean, there are things happening right now in the world that are worse than anything in any of my books. Right? There are people who live in there are people who live in Gaza right now, for example. There are people who live in southern Sudan right now, for example. There are people who are Uyghurs. You know, there are things that are way worse than anything I could come up with, um, or that I have come up with. But these worlds, to me, the ones I make, I don't just make them to horrify or to be horrible. I make them because they genuinely fascinate me. And the other thing about them as well is that people, regardless of what horror they live in, they find ways to make themselves happy. It's kind of, a lot of it is about expectation. If you expect to be hungry most of the time, you find an apple, you can be delighted, right? I always think of that. In fact, that's almost something stolen from what was the Cormac McCarthy book, The Road, right? Where they find an apple. And it's that, people do find themselves. I mean, the human condition, the joy and the happiness is about progress. When you're improving your situation, you feel happy. And it doesn't matter how awful your situation is. It's always relative rather than objective, you know? So the other thing as well is not just about relative happiness, it's about relative heroism as well, and relative morality, if you like, as in the Inferior, where the main character, the hero, and the nicest person in the entire book is a cannibal. Like, and there are people in that book, civilized people, who are not good people. But the cannibal is the person that, if you as a reader could only save one person from that book, you would save the cannibal, not the people who are more like you as the reader. And that's important to me as well. It's
Yeah.
it's like, you look on these people, they're savages, they're superstitious, they believe in gods, all these kind of things. Um, well, how would you do in that situation? What would you have done? Um, and 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 I want you to like them. I want you to admire them. I want you to wish you could be friends with them, or to put your arm around them, whatever, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what they have to do every day to survive.
And if anybody is listening who hasn't read The Inferior yet, we've mentioned it a lot already. Sympathizing with the identifying with the cannibal makes a lot of sense. I guarantee. Just have a look at it, and not in a Hannibal Lecter way at all. But yes, it's all about where do I go from here, and how can I move forward from here? And often
Mm,
the only resource that the protagonists have are their own bodies, which can be affected by a disability, which can be seen as unworthy by the rest of the society. But the main resource of anyone in these worlds is actually going to be their body, and that as a usable but also a be abusable um, resource is, I think, a very, very central point as well.
yeah, it's your body, and I'm glad you put it that way. Your body is something that can be spent. It's something that can be spent to buy time, to buy a little more life, to buy a little more progress, or a little more hope. Um, it is definitely that way in the call. It's definitely that way in the Sword Garden as well. That's exactly right.
Mhm. we've touched on this a little bit already, but you tend to start your stories in what appears to be the past, and then we get parallel realities in different ways that appear to be futuristic. So you like to put the past in the future very often, or next to the future. Um, are we trapped in an endless cycle? Why do you do that?
Yeah, it kind of doesn't matter. No, but it kind of doesn't matter. I don't know why I do it. I don't know why do I bite my I don't know why I bite my nails. I don't know I don't know why I put things in the past or make them feel like they're in the past. Um, but I think it almost doesn't matter. It's what I said before. Regardless, it's the progress that you make that makes you happy, or that makes the characters happy, regardless of the state of the world around you. You can still lead a very good life, being good for other people and helping other people and helping yourself. You can do all these things, you know. So it doesn't matter how things are going downhill or not. There's still a little world around you that you can make better. You can always make things better, and you can always make things worse, by the way. But
Sure, sure. I will tell you one thing that it definitely does for me as a reader, and this is probably bringing the discussion here to a close before we invite the Octocon members into the Zoom as well. But one thing that we seem to believe in very much is the link between technological and humanitarian progress. And that is something that, with your different parallels of apparently future, apparently past worlds, that link between technology and humanity, that is something that you seem to demonstrate is a fallacy.
yeah, I mean, I work in tech, so I'm well aware of the horrors of AI. Just to pick one example, it's not the only example of enormous, almost pointless data centers. No, I'm honestly well aware. I mean, I've had in my work, I've seen AI make things up. Just make things up, just completely invent them. That would be very dangerous to put into production. I've seen it with my own eyes. So yeah.
Are we then not better people than the ancient Egyptians?
Well, I am, Sean. I am.
Sure.
But you can work at it, as I've said. You keep working, praying to Horus. I think you'll be fine.
All right. I think with that, we're going to open this up to the members of Octocon. So this was, well, obviously, Octocon presents Peadar Ó Guilín and the Sword Garden, which I recommend very much. It is a lot of fun and there's a lot to think about. Obviously, we've also mentioned the Inferior, we've mentioned the Call, we've mentioned Forever in the Memory of God. Which is also short stories are always also available as a podcast still, as well as in book form. I mean, there's a lot out there. If you haven't read any of it, really, go. I mean, if there's any of it you haven't read, what are you waiting for? Go out there, wake your librarian up. I'm sure they understand. This, of course, is hosted by Octocon. So thank you very much to Catherine and the team. Octocon this year will take place the 3rd and 4th of October. It's always the first weekend of October. And this year it's going to be in the beautiful, I assume I've never been, city of Cork.
It is. You should go. You should
Yes.
go. You would love Cork. And thank you very much, Sean, by the way, in case I forget to say it. But you should go to Cork.
All right. And now, if you're a member of Octocon, you should have received a link in an email. It's also on Discord. Click on the link either in the email or on the Discord server, and you should be able to join us to ask your own questions. I think that's it. Thank you very much.